Hi, everybody. Welcome back. So I am here today to experience week 2 of my birthday month, and I'm celebrating by sharing this with my friends and talking to them about the golden age of comic books. I've reached out to each of them and offered them the chance to talk about their subject of choice. And my guest today is James Satter. Hi, James.
Oh, hey, thank you for having me.
Of course, glad to have you again. We've done a couple episodes already talking about other subjects, but for my Patreon viewers, you would find them there. They're not on the YouTube channel, so something to look for. Also, we are going to be talking about Patsy Walker today, because that's what you chose. Did you want to say a few opening words about why you chose Patsy Walker? Because many people might find that an unusual choice.
So, Patsy is really a breakout star in the golden age under the genre of teen humor. And so, Archie Andrews is probably heralded as the character from Pep Comics who is best known for teen humor.
Oh, yeah.
Patsy is introduced 3 years later. So Archie comes 1941, Patsy comes 1944 from Timely Comics, and really moves out into her own and becomes very popular and well known in that genre. She's much better known today from the comic books as the superheroine Hellcat. So she changes
Spoiler
quite a
alert.
Yeah, so spoiler alert, in the Bronze Age, she ends up having one of the most complicated stories in history. And then in the Jessica Jones series from a few years ago, her character is revamped as Trish Walker. It's sort of an alternate version of her. So instead of as
Huh,
Patsy Patricia, the Trish Walker character is clearly another version of her. So
I did
she's
not
had a
know that.
lot of iterations. But today we'll be focusing primarily on her golden age and then into the atomic age.
Right.
Roots, where life was a little bit simpler. Well, the writer who created Patsy Walker was Stuart Little. And if you search for his name, it's often no connection to the
Right. Really
mouse.
hard to research.
Yes. So there's not a lot of information I was able to find about him, but he was a timely writer and wrote a lot of the early Patsy Walker stories. As time goes on, most of the writers for Patsy Walker are male. Stan Lee ends up writing Patsy Walker as years go on. But then again, Ruth, as you mentioned, though, was the illustrator and creator of Patsy, so she's gets credit for that. And what's interesting too, and helpful to keep in mind, is Ruth's other comic book work included military comics, jungle comics. So she had a wide range of credits before developing Patsy.
That's
And
an excellent point. That when she was working for Friction House, she wasn't doing girl stories. She was doing like all ages adventure stories. And that's so important to remember that women were not pigeonholed in this genre until that genre happened, and then maybe that started to happen a little bit. Family is a really interesting choice. Well, it's kind of expected because he wrote most of the stories time just to save money, but he was also infamously kind of um, misogynist, and you can see that in all the Fantastic Four stories where Reed would tell Sue to shut up and be quiet. She was kind of forced into being invisible when she wasn't invisible. And did you see any of that in the Patsy Walker stories that you read by him?
So there's something interesting, and we could go on kind of a deep dive with Stanley, but but I actually think that's important because early 1960s superhero comic books, um, particularly by Marvel, particularly written by Stanley.
Oh yeah. Oh
Okay,
yeah.
we have the female characters. Wasp is almost decidedly an airhead. Scarlet Witch, though she starts out as a villain, then becomes a hero. She has some agency, but is overshadowed by her brother, Pietro or Quicksilver. And then Sue, yes, is torn between Reed and being abducted by Submariner. And
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting when Sue she gets her force field powers a few years into the series. The letters pages actually address the fact that people were writing in that she wasn't being handled very well. So readers were aware of that in the 1960s. So that's background about the
context.
1960s. That's context when we're thinking about Stan Lee. What's very interesting when you go back into the golden age and you look at Stan's writing and also other writers too, with how female characters were portrayed in the Captain America comic books and other adventure comic books. They feel more Bronze Age than Silver Age to me. They're intelligent, they're decisive, they stand up for themselves, and with in terms of Patsy Walker, which isn't a superhero comic book, but it's a teen adventure, she has agency and is active in her choices. So she isn't a passive character. She's, again, very active. And that's including in her romantic life. I'm actually mentioned something, if I can show some of the covers with Miss America. So for context, Patsy, as you mentioned, is introduced in Miss America #2. The title actually comes from a timely comic book heroine named Miss America. It's not a superhero title, but that's they're capitalizing on that recognition initially. The first several years of Miss America, the covers are not showing illustrations; they're showing photo shoots of girls with boys, teenager girls with boys, and the dynamic either is of them sort of happy couple like this, or the women choosing men. And so like this is a good example. You see there's two men and she's picking one over the other. I have another example of that here.
And these are not reprints. These are his actual issues. So thank you for taking them out of the plastic for us today.
Oh well, I when I buy the older issues, I buy ones that are well worn, so that way I feel comfortable reading through them.
You didn't have to crack them out of those containers that were graded. Okay.
So just in terms of how the comic book is presented, the men tend to be objectified in the teen humor comics of Patsy Walker and some other female protagonists where they are in charge. So
that's really interesting how it's kind of inverted from the 1960s model of how the genders play off against each other. So do you think that Stan Lee really had that understanding of his audience and that he flipped when he was writing superhero comic books because he figured that audience was all male? Or do you think that it was his changing more over time, or maybe was in response to women gaining more agency in the 60s and him wanting to repress that instinct from his readers?
I've never heard Stan address that directly. So I wish someone had.
Okay, on this channel, it's all about speculating about what we don't know.
Otherwise, so I understand. So here are a few working models that I have. One of them actually ties with, and this is something I'll bring up earlier, the comic book code and Wortham's criticism. So this infamous book, Seduction of the Innocent,
where in hardcover no less.
Yes. So I've read that cover to cover many times. And one of the there are a lot of legitimate criticisms I think Wortham brings up, and we may
Okay.
address some of those a little bit later, as they apply to the teen humor genre. But when that came out, and basically the comic book scare of 1954 onward that leads to the comic book code, at that time, Timely, which is the company that becomes Atlas, which is the company that becomes Marvel, isn't publishing superheroes. So Marvel characters aren't singled out. But this is where DC heroes are singled out, with Superman being, Nazi symbol, which makes no sense, but that's a
That's
criticism.
crazy.
Uh, with him being the Nietzsche archetype, and then with the speculation that Batman and Robin are a queer couple, and that Wonder Woman is a lesbian. And a big criticism in Wortham's book is that female characters aren't aren't feminine enough, and that marriage isn't portrayed in uh, a more traditional sense. And one idea I have is that then when Marvel starts launching their new wave of superhero comics in the early 1960s, I wonder if that may have been something that Stan was just afraid of getting backlash on and overcompensates by
In
having,
response to Wortham. Okay, yeah,
right, in
that definitely
response to
makes
work.
sense.
Yeah, that is one theory that I have. I don't know that, but I'm trying to look at why is the same writer, when he's now in his, reaches his 40s and is developing Marvel, writing females that are more regressive than he was writing in his 20s and 30s.
Crazy. He also had Patsy Walker was meant to seem like a real typical teenager, and I'm using air quotes here because real typical teenager comes from a panel in her first appearance. And how accurate would you say that is? Is she a real typical teenager in the 1940s sense?
Well, if by typical you mean middle class, has two married parents, lives in a town that's Centerville, has a younger brother, and she and her friends hang out at the soda shop, and her concerns are school and going to dances. It's typical in the sense of, let's kind of widen the scope.
Okay.
Uh, the Andy Hardy films that start in 1938,
More
they're
context. Right.
they're often cited as the impetus for this genre. Now, obviously, there are other factors going on,
Mhm.
and there are teenage characters in literature. I mean, going back to Little Women. So so there's more than one factor that leads into this. But in terms of the, oh well, life life as a whole is safe. My family life is safe, but my biggest issues are, getting a date and being well liked and muddling through school and maybe wondering what I might want to do when I graduate. If
Right.
we mean by that
Uh,
is typical from that framework.
So it is in one sense, it is the Hollywood version of reality, and there would have been plenty of exemptions to this. Like there was lots of poor teenagers that didn't have these availabilities that she has. But on the other hand, we can also see some things that are true about the 1940s in general from this, that a single income could support a
Mhm.
family of four in a suburban setting. So that was something that was true. It seems like fantasy now, but in the
But
1940s,
that
this was
was
reality.
commonplace, yes.
Yeah.
Um,
The relationship between the parents is very, very traditional, very conservative, but was something that was seen as normal at the time. The fact that she has a social life, and that she has like income to spend, suggests that it's a family that's comfortable. It's a family that also trusts the daughter with money and social mobility. She has the freedom to go out with her.
few topics that you brought up, and
Okay.
I'm going to show a couple of covers just to
Oh, wow.
show who we're talking about.
Okay.
And so some of the covers I'm showing are from the 1950s because, as I showed earlier, the Miss America comics where she begins typically don't show illustrations, so we don't actually see Patsy. But I'm going to bring back the covers though, just to point out though, even though, as you mentioned, these were eclectic, where they would have short stories, fashion tips,
Yes.
gags, as well as stories. Patsy being a breakout, for instance, here, Miss America, Patsy, Patsy Walker's highlighted right here. This becomes common. Patsy and then Buzz. Buzz is her boyfriend. So at this point, they're expecting readers to know who Patsy and Buzz are. And these are from the covers I'm showing from 1944 to 1948. Another one, Miss America with 3 Patsy Walker stories.
Yeah. Right up there.
So,
Even though she's just a backup feature in the magazine, she's still
right.
prominently mentioned.
So that's why I mentioned her as a breakup star, because there were other female characters who had comic strips or comic pages in there. But after her first few appearances, she becomes the breakout. The other thing to mention back with Ruth, a year after creating Patsy, she creates and both writes and illustrates Millie the model. And so
Oh, I
Millie
did not know
is
that.
an adult character. So in terms of, if Patsy is, quote, typical teen, Millie is glamorous. So Millie's comics are globetrotting. She travels the world. She a common routine or gag is that she's mobbed by photographers or asked for her autograph at inconvenient times. And Millie exists in the same shared universe as Patsy. So this is in the 1950s. Eventually, they meet. So this is Patsy with red hair, wanting to pretend to be Millie, and Millie actually visits Centerville a few times, and so Millie is glamorous.
Crossover. Nice.
And so in terms of typical teen, Millie would be a good contrast to the character who is more aspirational and Hollywood glamorous, as opposed to Patsy, who was initially supposed to be relatable, but also as time goes on, more of a good role model. She cares about doing well in school, for instance. And then I'll show a few things here in terms of her family. So we mentioned her family. This is Patsy and her parents are in the background. Buzz is on the couch. Buzz never goes into Patsy's room. Whenever he's visiting, they stay in the public areas and usually on the couch.
Yes,
Uh,
good kids.
a running gag is with Patsy's younger brother, Mickey, pictured here, where Mickey asks for money to stay away from them and leave them alone. And I'm going to mention some things in terms of messaging. This we do need to emphasize. All of the characters we're talking about are white, and there's
That's true.
almost no representation of people who aren't white. There's one comic I have where there is a reference to someone who's wealthy from India who is visiting town, but that's a rare exception.
Right. Anyone that's not white comes from like a world away. and
Exactly.
everyone in America is perceived to be white, which is not is certainly was not true, and was not accurate by any means. Certainly made coloring the book easier for the colorists. I'll give them that. But other than
Uh,
that, I don't think there's much value to it.
no, as a flip side, in contrast to some of the superhero comic books, even though most of the early superheroes are white, there's is some diversity for some characters that didn't necessarily catch on. Um, but like
Yeah.
if you read early issues of Wizard, you're going to see racially diverse background characters. In Centerville, where Patsy lives, everyone is white. So I just like to emphasize that whenever we're talking about what a typical or average means, there are a lot of qualifiers.
Understood. Asterisks
Yeah.
is on that.
Yeah. And then you were mentioning money before, though. I do want to mention, though, even though her family setting finances are safe, they're
Hmm.
not worried. We're not seeing her dad worry about paying the mortgage, for instance. However, they do care about money. So if something breaks, I mean, a common gag is, oh, something breaks and you have to get it repaired. Uh, that is a source of frustration, or concern if that happens.
Hmm.
Boyfriend Buzz works at the soda shop, and so this is Buzz at the soda
Oh,
shop here. He has this job early on in the 40s, so even though this is the 1950s, not a lot changes in Patsy's universe from 1944
yeah.
into the 1950s in high school. But a big point is he needs to raise money to go on dates. So it's very, very common for he and Patsy to actually have disagreements, where he will say, I can't afford to go to the movies. And then he has to pay for his car. This is where things can be both sexist, but also on some level there's a feminist aspect, and that kind of comes in conflict. Patsy has a driver's license, so Patsy gets her license in the comic
Oh,
in the 1940s,
nice. I
and
did not know that.
it's revisited again. We know she does not have her own car, but her dad from time to time will complain that she should be out running errands for the family.
Mm,
So there is an aspect of her dad might be the patriarch in the family, but he would like Patsy to be self-directed. And
I think
so,
that I think it's great to know. And so I was talking earlier about the freedom of mobility that Patsy Walker has, but she literally has freedom of mobility in that she can drive anywhere that she wants to as long as she's back by curfew, right? So
yeah,
that's
exactly.
pretty advanced for the time.
Now we don't see her driving often, but it's clearly established in multiple stories that she has her driver's license.
And it's
And even
not
though
just a gag, right? It's not like she's the
no, she
stereotypical bad
literally
woman
gets her
driver.
license in the 1940s, and it comes up again
Okay.
in the 1950s. And um, now, because it's a humor comic, driving incidents come up, but not in what I would say in a sexist way, because the same thing happens with Buzz. His car breaks
Wow.
down, or there's a prank and he gets a ticket, and then, oh no, I have to pay my ticket. So anything that can lend itself to humor is going to lend itself that way.
Gotcha.
But again, another thing that I think is important to note is that her father, in my view, is a stronger influence on her life than her mother, at least during the golden age comic books. Her mother is there,
Interesting.
and her mother is, um, I would say, more of a traditional or conventional
Yeah.
homemaker.
She's a trad wife.
And but I don't mean, I want to be careful that I'm not using that in a dismissive, a negative way. But her father very much is concerned that um, she should be prioritizing family responsibilities and schoolwork and not dates. And the parents both like Buzz. I'll just want you to know, Buzz is a pretty likable boyfriend. Okay, um, but he's sufficient. He's nice to Patsy. He has a lot of interests. He's on the football team, and so they don't have anything against Buzz in particular. But the dad periodically feels like, Patsy, you're probably too serious with him. You probably shouldn't be spending so much time on dates. And just that there's other values in life, and not to, the message is, don't lock yourself in to this one boy right now.
He's pumping the
And
brakes on the relationship, and she is to some extent listening to that. Then I'm
not
gonna
really. Go ahead.
I'm gonna contrast this with her very first story, where
Okay.
Patsy Walker in Hetty, and we're gonna talk about Hetty shortly.
Right.
But the two of them are interested not in boys in school, but in a full-grown man who's a famous singer who comes to town, and Hetty actually gets a chance to date him, and Patsy's jealous. So, are there instances where Patsy's the one with a roving eye, or does
Yes.
that just go? Okay.
So here's something that is an unusual triangle that happens with Patsy and Buzz. Patsy very much is a regular item with Buzz.
Mhm.
However, she also has other options. So she might have a crush on a teacher. Nothing ever develops with her and a teacher. I want to be very clear. There's nothing inappropriate, but she does develop crushes on teachers, or uh, there might be another visiting a young man in town who she's interested in. And so Buzz gets very jealous. And actually, also a common theme is a misunderstanding where her father asks Patsy to entertain the son of a client. And they're not really on a date. They simply are, platonically hanging out. Or
Mhm.
it's actually a relative of hers that's in town, like a cousin, and Buzz misinterprets that. So there's a sense of Buzz and Patsy aren't going steady, but they just regularly are dating, and both get jealous of the other. So there are times it's a misunderstanding that they're with someone else, and other times, yes, Patsy will have a roving eye. So she likes Buzz and often will dream of getting married. This is actually a running gag. So running gags that come up are Patsy dreams of marrying Buzz and then wakes
Mhm.
up because in the dream, Buzz is a lazy husband, or Buzz, you know, doesn't meet her expectations. And then she gets mad at him because of that. So there's an interesting dynamic. So on one hand, yes, they are regularly together and yet not together.
Mhm.
And then a triangle that comes up periodically is with Hetty. So Hetty Wolf is a recurring character from the beginning. So in the first appearance,
Mhm.
the characters we've been talking about, Patsy, her parents, her brother, Buzz, all introduced in her first appearance,
Yes.
as
Yes.
well as Hetty Wolf. So Patsy, by the way, often early on had brown hair, but then by 1950s, it's established that she's consistently a redhead. So a common element is if Patsy isn't giving Buzz enough attention, Hetty will jump in. And Buzz is never serious about Hetty, but if it's like, well, if you need someone to go bowling with or go to a movie with, she's there. So this isn't an Archie Andrews, Betty or Veronica. Buzz will always pick Patsy first. But if they get
Yeah.
into a
It's
fight or if
we
he's
never
jealous, yeah,
we're never confused about who's going to wind up with Buzz in these stories. But
right.
there's definitely a strong role for Hetty in the stories. She is the antagonist for a lot of the stories because Patsy's a girl, right? She's not going to be able to go up against bad guys like Miss America or Captain America can. She goes up against Hetty because they have a relationship that's largely based on jealousy and
And there were also
and
rivals in school, for instance. If
okay,
there's, if there's a class project and Patsy volunteers, and she increasingly will volunteer for extracurricular activities. And then Hetty might try to show her up. So Hetty is preoccupied with Patsy and is more of a rival of Patsy than Patsy is with Hetty. In terms of economics, Hetty's family, it is established, is wealthier than the other families. Um,
okay.
I would think she would still be middle class, but she's on the upper tier of middle class. So
So again, we're
uh,
not talking Betty and Veronica, where Veronica is the rich person and Betty's the poor girl. This is more like middle class versus upper middle class.
yes, more middle class versus upper middle class. And Hetty will often use that, and really nobody cares. So it's interesting that she will try to use the fact that her family